A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. If Wikipedia was considered a digital wasteland of unreliability in 2005, why on earth do we expect AI to be a flawless oracle in 2026? It is a bit of a double standard, isn't it?
It is a massive double standard, Corn. And I am Herman Poppleberry, by the way. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly this, the reliability paradox of AI-generated knowledge. He is essentially challenging the idea that AI is inherently untrustworthy, especially when you look at the mess of SEO-driven misinformation we have been swimming in for the last decade.
It is funny you mention the SEO era. Remember when you'd search for best cast iron skillet and the first 5 pages were just AI written, or worse, low-effort human-written blogs designed to sell you an affiliate link? We trusted that more than we trust a model that has actually read the metallurgical properties of iron. By the way, quick shout out to the tech behind the curtain. Today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash.
Which is fitting, because we are talking about the engineering of trust. Daniel's point is that while AI isn't perfect, it is being held to a standard that no human source has ever actually met. We are at this fascinating inflection point where LangGraph's March 2026 release has basically given us the tools to build these cyclic verification loops. We are moving from probabilistic guessing, just predicting the next word, to verifiable systems that check their own work.
I love the idea that we are holding a machine to a higher standard than a guy with a blog and a dream. But let's look at the baseline. If we are comparing AI to humans, how unreliable are we actually talking? Because I forget where I put my keys every morning, so my factual recall is already suspect.
Well, the data is actually pretty damning for us humans. There was a study back in 2025 showing that humans misremember between 20 and 40% of facts after just 6 months. Our brains are essentially lossy compression algorithms. We prioritize the gist over the detail. AI, on the other hand, doesn't forget in the same way. It might hallucinate if the prompt is poor or the model is small, but in a structured environment, its consistency is leagues ahead of a human expert trying to recall a specific statistic from a paper they read 3 years ago.
So we are essentially lossy biological hard drives. But the critique is always, the AI made up a legal citation, or it told me to put glue on my pizza. Those are the headlines. Why does that stick so much more than a human being wrong?
It is what psychologists call algorithmic aversion. We are weirdly forgiving of human error because we understand it. If a doctor misinterprets a scan, we say, well, they're human, they were tired. If an AI misinterprets a scan, we say, the technology is dangerous and should be banned. But the reality is that the baseline, the pre-AI internet, was arguably a much poorer source of information. Think about the read later graveyard we talked about in episode 1778. We've been drowning in content we can't process, and the stuff we did process was often manipulated by keyword stuffing and backlink schemes.
Right. The old 10 things you didn't know about vitamin C articles that were just 300 words of fluff and 20 ads. You couldn't actually learn from that. It was just a trap for your attention. So, if the old way was broken, how does the new way? This agentic workflow, Daniel mentioned, actually fixed the hallucination problem. I keep hearing about LangGraph and verification loops. Give me the technical breakdown, Herman. Don't spare the details.
This is where it gets really cool. In a standard chatbot interaction, you ask a question. The LLM predicts tokens, and you get an answer. It is a straight line. If it is wrong, it is wrong. But with an agentic workflow using something like LangGraph, you introduce cycles. You have a generator node that creates an initial answer based on a prompt. But before that answer ever reaches you, it passes to a critic or validator node.
Like a high-tech internal peer review?
Or, well, it functions as an automated peer review. The critic node is programmed to be skeptical. It might use retrieval, augmented generation, RAG, to go out and find the original source document. It compares the AI's generated claim to the actual text in the source. If the generator says the chemical melting point is 500 degrees and the source document says 450, the critic catches that discrepancy and sends it back to the generator with a note saying, "You're wrong, look at the source again and correct it."
It's basically the AI version of show your work.
It is. And what is wild is the performance jump. There was a benchmark in 2025 comparing LangGraph-based workflows against crew AI and unassisted models. The unassisted LLMs had about a 78% factual accuracy rate on complex technical tasks. The agentic workflows with these verification loops, 94%. That is a massive leap. We are talking about a 6% error rate versus a 22% error rate. At 94%, you are starting to rival or even beat the accuracy of a human researcher who is rushing to finish a report.
Okay, but 94% still isn't 100. If I'm using this as a trusted source to learn something critical, that 6% error rate feels like a landmine. How do we close that last mile?
The last mile isn't necessarily about getting to 100% because, again, humans aren't at 100%. The last mile is about deterministic traces. In these LangGraph workflows, you can see the audit trail. You can see the AI thought X, it checked source Y, it corrected itself to Z. When you can see the reasoning in the sources, the trust shifts from "I trust this machine is smart" to "I trust this process is rigorous."
That is an important distinction. It is the difference between trusting a person's vibes and trusting a scientific method. But let's talk about the SEO-driven internet again. Daniel mentioned that it was more susceptible to manipulation. If I can engineer a perfect AI knowledge pipeline, what stops someone from engineering a perfect AI misinformation pipeline?
That is the cat and mouse game of 2026. But here is why the AI model is actually more resilient. It is harder to trick. A model that is performing cross-verification across multiple high-authority sources than it is to trick a search engine algorithm that just looks at metadata and links. If your agentic workflow is anchored in, say, PubMed, or a verified repository of technical manuals, a million fake blog posts won't change the output because the critic node is ignoring the open web in favor of the grounded truth set.
So it's a walled garden of facts. I like that. But I want to poke at this idea of algorithmic appreciation versus aversion. Why was Wikipedia the punching bag of the early 2000s? I remember teachers saying, "Do not cite Wikipedia or you'll fail." Now, it is the first place those same teachers go to check a fact. Is AI just on that same 20-year trajectory?
I think the trajectory is much shorter this time, but the anxiety is higher because AI is active while Wikipedia is passive. Wikipedia is a digital encyclopedia, you have to go to it. AI is a synthesis engine, it comes to you, it creates. And that feels more threatening to our sense of intellectual authority. But look at the history academics in 2006 were terrified that Wikipedia would debase knowledge. Instead, it democratized it. It became a massive, self-correcting organism that, in many studies, proved more accurate than the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Because the many eyes theory worked. The more people looking at a page, the faster errors get fixed.
Right. And agentic AI is basically the many eyes theory, but the eyes are digital and they work at the speed of light. You don't have to wait for a human editor to notice a typo or a factual error. The validator node catches it in 300 milliseconds. That is why I think we're going to see a shift where people actually start to prefer AI-generated synthesis over human-written summaries. If I know a summary was generated by a system that cross-checked 4 different primary sources and flagged its own uncertainties, I'm going to trust that more than a journalist who might have an axe to grind or a deadline to hit.
It's funny, you mentioned flagging its own uncertainties. That feels like the holy grail of AI communication. If an AI can say, "I'm 98% sure about the physics here, but only 60% sure about the historical context because the sources conflict," I would trust it implicitly.
And that is exactly what we are starting to see with tools like Guardrails AI or Outlines. We are enforcing structured outputs. We are forcing the model to provide a confidence score for every claim it makes. If the score is low, the system can be programmed to either hide the answer or explicitly warn the user. That kind of transparency is something humans are notoriously bad at. We love to sound certain even when we're guessing.
Oh, I've seen you do that at Thanksgiving dinner, Herman. You'll explain the intricacies of the Electoral College with the confidence of a founding father, even if you just skimmed the Wikipedia page 5 minutes prior.
Guilty as charged. But that is the point. I am a biased, leaky, overconfident biological agent. A well-engineered LangGraph pipeline is a humble, rigorous, and verifiable digital agent. Which one do you want as your tutor?
Well, if the digital tutor is as patient as Daniel says, I'll take the machine. But this leads to a bigger question. If we get to the point where AI reliability is assumed to surpass human synthesis, what happens to the way we learn? Daniel mentioned that online courses might become obsolete. That is a pretty bold claim. I mean, people pay thousands for these masterclasses and certifications.
They do, but think about why. You pay for a course because someone else has done the hard work of curating the knowledge. They've decided what you need to know and in what order. But it is a one-size-fits-all model. If you already know 40% of the material, you're wasting your time for nearly half the course. If you struggle with one specific concept, the static video doesn't care, it just keeps playing.
So, the last mile of education is moving from consuming a syllabus to generating a learning path.
Imagine a world, and we are basically there in 2026, where you tell an AI, I want to understand the mechanical engineering behind SpaceX's Raptor engine, but I only have a high school level understanding of physics. The AI doesn't just give you a link to a course. It synthesizes a custom curriculum. It explains the basics you're missing, skips the stuff you already know, and provides real-time feedback as you ask questions. It's just-in-time education.
I can see the appeal. It's like having a private tutor from Oxford who is also an expert in every other field and never gets annoyed when you ask the same question 3 times. But there has to be a downside. If I'm curating my own learning, how do I know what I don't know? Isn't there a risk of missing those useful tangents you always talk about?
There is a massive risk of what I call radical fragmentation. If everyone is learning from their own bespoke, hyper-optimized AI tutor, we lose the common core. Think about it. If you and I both take a university course on the Industrial Revolution, we might have different opinions, but we are working from the same set of facts and the same reading list. We have a shared epistemic foundation.
But if my AI tutor decides to focus on the textile industry, and yours focuses on the steam engine, and we never cross paths,
It's worse than that. What if your AI tutor, based on your preferences, decides to downplay certain social costs of the era, while mine highlights them? We aren't just learning different things, we are developing entirely different versions of truth. That is the second order effect that worries me. We already see this with social media algorithms creating echo chambers of opinion. If we move to AI generated knowledge, we could end up with echo chambers of facts.
that is a chilling thought. It's the fragmentation of reality. If I can tune my AI to be a conservative learning tool or a progressive learning tool, I'm not actually learning, I'm just reinforcing my existing worldview with synthesized data that feels like objective truth because it came from a verified pipeline.
And that is the paradox of personalization. The more we optimize for the individual's learning style and interests, the more we risk isolating them from the broader collective knowledge of humanity. There was an experiment at MIT recently, a 2026 study where they used AI tutors for 40% of a course. The students' grades went up by 15% because the learning was so efficient. But when they tested those students on their ability to collaborate with people who had used a different AI tutor, their communication scores dropped. They didn't have the same vocabulary of concepts to bridge the gap.
So we are getting smarter in a vacuum, but dumber in a society. That is a hell of a trade-off. Is there a way to engineer around that? Can we build serendipity or shared foundations into the LangGraph?
You can, but it requires intentionality. You'd have to program the agent to say, here is the consensus view, but here is a contradictory perspective you should consider. Or, most people learning this also study X, which might seem irrelevant but is actually crucial for context. But then you're back to the curator model. You're back to someone else deciding what is important.
It feels like we are trading one kind of gatekeeper for another. We used to have professors and editors. Now we have prompt engineers and workflow architects.
But the difference is scale and accessibility. A professor can only help 30 students at a time. A well-built LangGraph pipeline can help 30 million, and it can do it for the cost of a few GPU credits. That is the empowerment part of Daniel's prompt. We are talking about giving someone in a remote village the same quality of technical synthesis that a student at Stanford gets. That is hard to argue against, even with the risk of fragmentation.
I agree. The democratization of high-level knowledge is a net positive, even if it's messy. But let's get practical for a second. If I'm a listener and I want to start using these reliable AI tools, how do I actually distinguish between a probabilistic guesser and a verifiable pipeline? Because they both look like a chat box.
That is the big challenge for the user. Right now, most people are just using raw LLMs. They are going to a website, typing a question, and taking the first answer. That is the dangerous way to do it. The reliable way is to look for systems that use agentic RAG. You want to see citations. You want to see the ability to inspect the trace.
So, if the AI doesn't tell you where it got the information, don't trust it.
And even better, look for tools that allow you to bring your own data. If you're a developer, you should be looking at frameworks like LangGraph or Haystack to build your own verification loops. Use a critic node. Use Guardrails AI to enforce that the output doesn't contain certain types of common errors. If you are a non-technical user, look for platforms that explicitly state they are using a multi-agent verification process. It is the difference between reading the tabloid and reading a peer-reviewed journal.
It's basically digital literacy 2.0. We used to teach kids how to spot a fake website. Now we have to teach them how to spot an unverified AI response.
And that brings us back to Daniel's comparison with the pre-AI internet. Was it really better? We had to navigate a minefield of ads, tracking pixels, and SEO-optimized garbage. At least with an AI pipeline, the manipulation is often more transparent if you know where to look. You can see the system prompt. You can see the temperature settings. You can see the sources.
It's a bit like the open source movement for knowledge. If the pipeline is transparent, the knowledge is more trustworthy. But I'm still stuck on this last mile idea. Daniel asks, when does AI reliability surpass human synthesis? I would argue that in some narrow fields it already has. I mean, look at legal discovery or medical literature reviews. No human can read 10,000 papers in an afternoon and find the one common thread.
You're right. In narrow synthesis, AI is already the king. But the last mile for general knowledge is the ability to handle nuance and cultural context. That is where humans still have the edge. If you ask an AI about a political conflict, it can give you the facts from both sides, but it might miss the deep-seated emotional resonance that a human historian would catch.
But isn't that just bias by another name? We call it nuance when we like it, and unreliability when we don't.
That is a very sharp point, Corin, and it is exactly why the double standard exists. We want our experts to be nuanced, but we want our AI to be objective. But objectivity is a myth. Every piece of data was created by a human with a perspective. By trying to force AI into a box of perfect objectivity, we are setting it up to fail.
So maybe the last mile isn't the AI getting better, but us getting more realistic. Maybe we need to accept that AI is a legitimate way to learn, not because it is perfect, but because it is a different, highly efficient, and increasingly verifiable perspective.
I think that is the most grounded take I've heard all week. We should treat AI as a cognitive exoskeleton. It doesn't replace your brain, it just lets you carry much heavier loads of information. But you still have to decide where you're walking.
I like that. I'll be the guy in the exoskeleton, but I'll probably still forget where I parked the suit. Let's look at some practical takeaways for people who want to actually use this stuff. You mentioned LangGraph's March 2026 release. What is the one thing a developer or a curious nerd should do with that?
Use the cyclic nature of it. Don't just build a chain of step A to step B, build a loop. Create a reviewer node that has the power to reject the worker node's output. It is a simple architectural change, but it results in that 16% accuracy boost I mentioned. If you're not a developer, start using AI as a cross-checker. If you read a news article, ask an AI to find 3 other sources that confirm or contradict the main claim. Use it as a tool for epistemic hygiene.
Epistemic hygiene. That sounds like something you'd need a special soap for. But I get it. It's about not letting your brain get infected by the first thing it reads.
And for the educators out there, don't fight the AI. If your students are using it to curate their own learning, help them build better curation agents. Teach them how to audit the AI sources. The syllabus of the future isn't a list of books, it is a set of verification protocols.
It's a brave new world, Herman. We are moving from learning what to think to learning how to verify what the machine thinks. It feels like a lot of work, honestly. I thought the AI was supposed to make my life easier.
It makes the finding easier, but it makes the knowing more of a responsibility. You can't just outsource your intellect, you can only amplify it.
Well, my amplified intellect is telling me we've covered a lot of ground, from the lossy compression of the human brain to the 94% accuracy of LangGraph loops. It's clear that Daniel is onto something. The unreliability of AI is often a reflection of our own standards being higher for silicon than for carbon.
It is the ultimate compliment to the technology, in a way. We expect it to be better than us, and with the right engineering, it actually is. We just have to be brave enough to trust the process over the person.
And on that note, we should probably wrap this up before my biological hard drive hits its 20% loss limit for the hour.
Fair enough. This has been a deep one. I think we've moved the needle a bit on the reliability paradox.
I hope so. At least we didn't tell anyone to put glue on their pizza. That is 100% accuracy record for this episode.
So far, so good.
Alright, let's get out of here. If you're enjoying our deep dives into Daniel's weird prompts, do us a favor and leave a review on whatever podcast app you're using. It genuinely helps us reach more people who are curious about the last mile of AI knowledge.
Big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the gears turning. And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this entire pipeline. It wouldn't exist without them.
This has been My Weird Prompts. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the ways to subscribe.
Stay curious and keep those verification loops running.
Catch you in the next one.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts.